Every single pick in your fantasy football drafts is really important, so it's crucial to know who the best value in every single round is to make your draft as best as it can possibly be. With that being said, I'm going to give you guys my list of the best player to draft in every single round, all the way from round 1 down to round 14, with analysis and reasonings behind every single one of these picks. And make sure to watch to the end because the later rounds are when drafts are actually won, so you're going to want to stick around for that. And I might have some bonus players in each one of these rounds you don't want to miss out on too. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into round 1 of our fantasy football drafts. I mean, it is kind of hard to mess up in round 1, but it is possible. I could say take Justin Jefferson and have this round be over, but that would be too obvious, and everybody would take Justin Jefferson any pick that they had in the draft. So outside of Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Christian McCaffrey, who are my first 3 picks in fantasy football, my favorite player in this round has to be Travis Kelce. Now, if you guys have been around this page long enough, you know I would have put Cooper Kupp here, but now he's dealing with some kind of hamstring injury. Who knows how long he's going to be out. So I replaced him with Travis Kelce, and I love Travis Kelce as well. I'm usually not a really big draft a tight end early kind of guy, especially in round 1 or 2, but Travis Kelce is exactly what the definition of a positional advantage is. And his value at his position is truly not matched by any other player in any other position outside of maybe Justin Jefferson. Kansas City has run a Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce led offense exclusively since Tyreek Hill left the team. Part of the reason they're doing this is because Travis Kelce is just so good, but the other half is that they really don't have any established wide receiver options outside of him to rely on. And they just won the Super Bowl with that offensive scheme, so if it's not broken, why fix it? Travis Kelce is essentially a wide receiver that you get to put at your tight end slot, and we all know how terrible tight ends are. Outside of the fact that he's been a top 2 tight end since 2016 consistently, the gap between him and the tight end 2 is absolutely massive. He scored 220 fantasy points last year, which made him the tight end 1 on the season, but that's 60 more points than the tight end 2 George Kittle had. And the reason I say he's essentially a wide receiver that we get to finesse and put in the tight end slot is because his 220 fantasy point total on the season would have made him the wide receiver 6 on the year, right behind Stephon Diggs, and that is crazy. And George Kittle, the tight end 2 with 140 fantasy points on the season, would be the wide receiver 20, and that is a massive difference. Not to account for the gaps between the tight end 2, 3, 4, and 5, and it's just crazy. And last year he was even more of a touchdown threat than he was years prior because there's no Tyreek Hill, and he had multiple games where he had more than 2 touchdowns and absolutely boomed in fantasy. He also never gets injured. He hasn't missed a game from injury in 9 seasons, and for a tight end, that is absolutely unheard of. Getting all of this upside in pick 6 or 7 is absolutely insane, and a really good safe but high upside start to your draft. I love taking him in the first round a lot. Now moving down to round 2, my favorite player to draft in this section is Amon-Ra, with Nick Chubb being a close second. But I see him creep up almost into the first rounds of drafts now, especially with Jonathan Taylor falling down draft boards with his holding out. But Amon-Ra is such a good value at the 1-2 turn in fantasy football, and let me explain why. First reason being, he's one of the most efficient and targeted wide receivers in the NFL. He was second in targets per route run at 32%, and that's only behind Tyreek Hill. And this really does make sense because there's no wide receiver depth behind him. I mean, the wide receiver 2 and 3 on this team is Marvin Jones and Khalif Raymond. And yes, Jameson Williams does come back after his 6-week suspension is over, but a lot of people are treating this as a bad thing, but it couldn't be more far from the truth. I'm going to absolutely debunk this take because the reason people are saying Jameson Williams is going to come back and make him worse is because Jameson Williams is good. Like, that's all. Why is that not the case for Marvin Jones or Khalif Raymond? But anybody that looks that deep and just knows football knows that's just not how it works. They're 2 completely different players and receivers. They're actually going to work very well together, and Williams, if anything, is going to open up this offense completely for more work for Amon-Ra. Jameson Williams is a field stretch guy. He uses his insane speed to take the top off of defenses so that they can't just stack the box and intermediate routes, and it causes the defense to stretch out to prevent deep balls. And Amon-Ra is more of a slot wide receiver. He played more than half of his snaps from the slot. Because of this, they really do work together well because Jameson Williams is going to be running down the field taking defensive pressure off, and Amon-Ra is going to take the intermediate to short route game, and he's not going to be able to be double teamed like he usually is. On top of that, he has the second easiest schedule for fantasy football wide receivers, including the fantasy playoffs, so you're really setting yourself up for a high floor, high upside player in your first couple rounds by drafting him. And that is exactly what you want to aim for in your early rounds. Don't get too fancy, don't get too cute, just take the guys that have a high ceiling and a high floor because you want to secure the value in the first rounds so you can go heavy upside in the later rounds. The Lions also have a really efficient run game that keeps the defenses guessing with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, who are 2 very capable running backs. So the offense is going to move, and he's all around a really good pick. A round 2 value is very, very good for me. But if we move down to round 3, my favorite pick here is easily Devonta Smith. Yes, over T. Higgins. Smith is going into his third year in the NFL, which historically is the year when wide receivers really start to make their breakout. Last year, Smith finished as the wide receiver 10, but most of his fantasy production came from the last few weeks of the season. After the Eagles' Week 7 bye, he got turned into a target monster. He averaged 10 targets a game, and keep in mind that's all as the wide receiver 2 behind AJ Brown. The main reason people aren't absolutely reaching on him is because he's the wide receiver 2 behind AJ Brown, and that's really all people have against Devonta Smith. Even that isn't really that big of a concern because the Eagles have one of the most high-powered offenses in the NFL, and they're going to move target volume around the entire offense, and there's really going to be no scarcity of targets anywhere. But Smith actually finished with more routes run than AJ Brown did. He had a 96% route completion percentage, pretty much meaning that he was on the field for the entirety of every dropback they had. And that number ranks 4th in the NFL, so if you're on the field when they're passing, you're gonna get the opportunities. Back to this AJ Brown debate, they pretty much average the same amount of target share with 29 and 27%, so they really operate as a 1A and B situation instead of a 1 and 2. And I could list off a whole bunch of stats from the second half of the season that would make you want to draft him more, but I really don't think I need to do that. Only downside I could see with Smith is that if the Eagles keep dominating teams and winning by so many points, they're not going to be passing the ball for all 4 quarters, and obviously that's going to lead to less target volume. But again, that's outside of his control. Regardless of that, a whole bunch of other players in round 3 have way more red flags than he does, so I love him as my round 3 value. Now moving it down to round 4, I don't have a favorite player that I like drafting and targeting here, but I really like taking quarterbacks. If you guys know me, you know I really don't like taking quarterbacks super early because you miss out on values like Kelsey or Amon-Ra. But the drop-off of fantasy production in quarterbacks absolutely drops off after round 4 and 5, so I really like targeting them in this range because it's not too early, but it's also not too late. This is the sweet spot for quarterback, if you would want to say that. And the reason I love drafting quarterbacks in this round the most is because you can get guys like Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, or Justin Fields who all have potential to finish top 5 in the quarterback position. So I'm going to single out each one of these quarterbacks I just named really quick and give you guys a little bit of a breakdown on why I do think they're good values. We're going to start out with Justin Herbert because he's another guy that's going in this round that I really do like. He has one of the most pass-heavy offensive schemes in the entire NFL, and this isn't hard to believe. He has the most pass yards in the entire history of the NFL in his first 3 years. He has the offense around him to absolutely succeed like he has for the past few years. He's being drafted a bit lower this year after finishing as the QB 11 last year, which really isn't his fault. He was playing through a bunch of injuries, which caused his fantasy points per game to go down, and he finished a little bit lower than he usually does. But the year before that, when he wasn't injured, he was the QB 2 on the year, which is a huge drastic difference. And now his wide receiver core is healthy. Mike Williams and Keenan Allen combined for 11 missed games with injury last season, and if you're missing more than half the season with injuries, your offense isn't going to be as good. It's just a given. When your number 1 wide receiver is Josh Palmer, your pass attack isn't going to be as explosive. And all of these things are making Justin Herbert go as the QB 7 this year, and I think it's pretty much impossible for him not to exceed his ADP. Chargers also drafted rookie wide receiver Quentin Johnston to help with this health issue for the wide receiver core. He is just going to be another receiving threat for Justin Herbert and another safety blanket if Mike Williams or Keenan Allen were to be injured again. He is a really good wide receiver 2 or 3 option to raise Justin Herbert's floor up that much. But if we go ahead and look at Lamar Jackson, again, this one is pretty obvious. He is the best rushing quarterback in the NFL. No, it's not Justin Fields. And this offense has improved a lot. They got Odell signed over the offseason. Rashawn Bateman is coming back. They have Zay Flowers, who they just drafted as a high upside rookie wide receiver. J.K. Dobbins is also coming back from injury. Mark Andrews is healthy. There's a whole bunch of good things going on in this offense, and it's really going to come together. Lamar Jackson is coming back, and everything is in the swing of things. This team is improving in every way possible, and they made a coaching change, and they really want to be more pass heavy this year, and that really is good for Lamar Jackson because he's always going to have that rushing upside. But now if they're more pass heavy, he has so many options to pass to. That's just making him a super safe high upside quarterback because of all the rushing upside and apparently the inevitable passing upside too. We do have to talk about Justin Fields as well, another quarterback that I really love in this round 4-ish area. He has really improved in his passing game and continues to do that every single year, and obviously he is a above average rusher for fantasy football quarterbacks. Last year he averaged 70 yards on the ground rushing himself, which is more than most starting running backs get, and that's absolutely insane. But that number is going to come down. It's pretty much impossible to maintain that in a good offense. They also brought in DJ Moore. This offense is going to be more well-rounded. He's still going to average about 50 rushing yards a game, don't get me wrong, but his passing upside is going to make up for those 20 or so rushing yards he lost. But moving down to round 5, this is really when it starts getting interesting because you got to start hunting for fantasy football values now. And there's so many different directions you could go, but my favorite pick in round 5 is going to be Miles Sanders. And he's a bit of a sleeper himself. The Panthers just signed him to one of the biggest, if not the biggest, free agency running back signing over the offseason, 4 years, $25 million. So clearly they trust him and they're giving him the keys to this backfield. And with no Christian McCaffrey, no Donta Foreman, there really is no backfield right now. And part of the reason why I like Miles Sanders so much is because he's going to a team with a lot of familiar faces in the coaching staff. A lot of the Panthers coaching staff now is former Eagles coaches. They already know what he's capable of. So he's going to be the clear workhorse running back for probably the first time in his career. And he's more than capable to do that. Last year he finished as the RB10 in half PPR formats and averaged just over 5 yards per carry and 13 touchdowns on the year, which is a huge jump from the 0 touchdowns he scored the year before that. He's also super trusted in the red zone. He was a top 10 running back in red zone usage. He's all around a super efficient guy. And now he's going from the Eagles to the Panthers, who are a lot more of a run heavy team, and they have a top 10 offensive line. And yeah, the Panthers aren't as offensively dominant as the Eagles were, but a lot of the Eagles' offense came from the receiving game in A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert. They didn't really rely on the running game. Miles Sanders also had the best pass-catching season of his career, which is very impressive because the Eagles ranked bottom 3 in targets out of the backfield. Blackshear and Chuba are the only other running backs in this backfield that could take any volume from him, but they are not proven at all. And they really aren't going to get any kind of volume unless Miles Sanders gets injured, but obviously we can't predict that. Sanders has a path to be an actual workhorse running back for the first time in his career, and yes, the Panthers are worse than the Eagles, but they run completely different offensive schemes. They have a new quarterback in Bryce Young, and rookie quarterbacks like to run the ball a little bit more to get acclimated to the actual football speed and experience of the NFL. But we saw how good James Conner could be in a terrible Cardinals offense, so you can't make the case that the Panthers aren't going to be good, so he won't be fantasy relevant. If you're only taking him with a round 5 pick, that is a lot of high upside value that I'm willing to take every time. But moving down to round 6, my favorite player here is Darren Waller, and this is for a couple reasons. In round 6, he's being drafted around guys like Tyler Lockett, Christian Watson, DeAndre Swift, all guys that are a clear step below, guys being drafted even a round above them. But then we have Darren Waller, who's projected to be the tight end 4 on the season, being drafted in round 6. While there's a drop off in running back and wide receiver in this round, the tight end pool is still decently strong if you can get him. But I get it, the Giants offense is not desirable whatsoever, and Darren Waller has had his fair share of injury history, but he has a realistic chance to finish as a top 3 tight end in the NFL going in the 6th round. And I'd way rather take him over mid-tier wide receivers or running backs. And the good thing about him going in round 6, if you really are worried about his injury history, you're drafting him low enough to where he won't burn you, and you can grab guys like Greg Dulcich or Tyler Higbee a couple rounds later to soften that impact. But back to actually why he's my favorite pick in this round, Waller is the last of the top tier tight ends being drafted, but the 3 tight ends being taken after him are Pat Freiermuth, Evan Ingram, and David Njoku, a clear step down. All good tight ends, but you can see how big of a drop this is. So if we can wait till round 6 to get Darren Waller and load up on good high value running backs and wide receivers in the earlier rounds, you are really setting yourself up for success. Outside of Saquon Barkley, who's a running back, there is no other player commanding targets. Yeah, Jalen Hyatt and Wan'Dale Robinson might get a couple of targets here and there, but in this offensive scheme, there's just not room for wide receivers to excel. You've seen Daniel Jones like to target the tight ends year in and year out, but it kind of goes under the radar because they're low-level tight ends or they get injured and something happens to where you can't really definitively say that's a good tight end. But now he has Darren Waller, who is a top tight end in talent, clearly. Again, like Travis Kelce, he's essentially a wide receiver that you get to throw in your tight end slot, assuming he's fully healthy. He's a huge red zone threat, something that they haven't had in a very long time, since the Odell days, if we're being honest. He's going to open up this offense for Daniel Jones and Saquon and really create a well-rounded team that can move the ball and have more offensive flow. The only knock you can put on him is his injury history and his age, but you can't really take that away from him because you can't control injuries. But again, if you're really worried about that, just grab a lower high upside tight end like Greg Dulcich or Tyler Higbee and you'll be perfectly fine. But I just love grabbing Darren Waller in this 6th round because the drop off from the tight end tiers is absolutely steep. And you guys know I'm all about grabbing value when we do drafts. We're moving down to round 7 for my favorite pick here. It has to be Javonte Williams, and this one might be a little bit controversial to some people. Javonte Williams is coming off an ACL tear and has been rehabbing over the offseason, and a lot of people are putting this against him and saying he's not going to return the same, which is a valid statement, considering historically most running backs don't come back the same after ACL injuries. The reason I don't think this fact should steer you away from him is because we're drafting Breece Hall in round 3, and he's pretty much the exact same kind of player. He's coming off an ACL injury. There isn't that much backfield competition with Javonte Williams. Literally the only thing you can say about him is that he has a knee injury and the Broncos offense isn't as good as the Jets. But I just find it hard to believe that people are completely out on a clear RB1 on a team when he's being drafted around other RB2s like David Montgomery or James Cook. I will admit, Javonte has his own fair share of red flags, but so does every other player when you're getting down to the round 7, 8 of these drafts. Javonte Williams has the 6th easiest running back schedule for fantasy football running backs, and he had borderline elite running back numbers before his injury. He was RB12 in expected points per game, he had a top PFF value, and Javonte Williams avoided the PUP list and is practicing in training camp full pads. He said he's not going to play unless he feels 100% and he can come into this offense blazing on his first step on the field. And this offense wants to give him the full 100% workhorse role as well. But let's go with these other people's narratives. Let's say he does start slow the first couple weeks. He's being drafted as the RB26 147 in the 7th round, and it is nearly impossible for him not to exceed his ADP throughout the entirety of the season. It just does not make sense. The only way he would bust is if he gets injured again. But from a pure value perspective, this ADP is actually laughable and disrespectful. But moving down to round 8, there are two guys that I really do like drafting at this ADP, and that is David Njoku and Jahan Dotson. I'm going to talk about them both. I'm leaning towards David Njoku to be my favorite pick in round 8 for a few reasons. For the longest time, David Njoku was working in 2 tight end sets and was never really given the tight end 1 volume. He always played around 50 or 60% of the tight end snaps. Last year was his first year as the true tight end 1 for the Browns, and he finished the season as the tight end 11 on the year, which is a huge jump from his previous years. I mean, he's been in the league since 2017. He's averaged a tight end 40 finish. David Njoku is entering the prime of his career. He's only 28 years old. He's built for tight end 1 production. He is probably the most athletic tight end in the NFL. He's 6'4". He has a huge wingspan. He's built to be a red zone threat and a target hog. Last year, he was able to finish as the tight end 11 despite Deshaun Watson absolutely tanking this offense's efficiency. And they were bottom 5 in the entirety of Deshaun Watson being the starting quarterback. But now Deshaun Watson gets a full offseason with the team, and they're just going to improve. It's just a fact. And with David Njoku going into his 2nd year of the tight end 1 on this team, I really could see him blossoming into like a top 6 tight end finish. He finished tight end 11 last year, and we're drafting him as the tight end 11 this year. So if you predict the Browns offense to improve or him to get any little bit better, you should be drafting him earlier than this. So he is a very, very easy pick for me and has a lot of value in the 8th round. And as far as Jahan Dotson, he's another criminally underrated player. If it wasn't for injury, he was on track for 100 receiving yards and over 50 receptions on the year, but he just so happened to miss a third of the season. He had one of the highest red zone target rates in the entire NFL and at times led Terry McLaurin in targets. But people really forget about him because nobody cares about the Commanders. They're not a very fantasy happy team, and he's been injured, but he was drafted with the 16th overall pick. Now that doesn't mean he's entitled to be a top wide receiver, but it means he has hidden value and he's just underappreciated. My only drawback is that the quarterback situation could be bad with Sam Howell because, I mean, we've never really seen him start an entire season or play more than 2 games. But I'm pretty sure we can all speculate he's going to be better than Carson Wentz and Taylor Heineke were. And however much better that Sam Howell is than them is just more value for Jahan Dotson. So I really do like him again this year as well. He really is undervalued. Moving down to round 9, my favorite player in this round easily is Quentin Johnston. And a lot of people aren't too high on him simply because of how many receiving options there are on this Chargers offense. And yeah, when we're looking at wide receivers, pecking order does matter. Most likely he's going to start out behind Austin Eckler, behind Keenan Allen, behind Mike Williams, and he's probably going to be the 3rd or 4th option for this team in targets. And that doesn't sound very good, but he was drafted with the 21st overall pick in the draft this year, so they clearly need him for something. That reason is that Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are both getting old and they have a very lengthy injury history. Last year, they both combined to miss over 11 games for the entirety of the season. So if you expect either of them to miss at least 1 game this season, that's going to put Quentin Johnston into a top 25 wide receiver week. That's pretty good considering he's being drafted as the wide receiver 50. That's a 2x increase. Not to mention, it's the best possible offense to be a 3rd or 4th option in. The Chargers have one of the most pass-happy offenses in the NFL. And if you can get him in the 9th round around guys like Jacoby Myers and Rashad Bateman, he is a clear level above all of them. And he really doesn't even need an injury to be relevant, so a 9th round ADP is an easy take for me. But moving down to round 10, this is when things really start to get interesting because we have to hunt for value and do our research. That is why you guys are on this video. My favorite player to grab in round 10 is easily Jameson Williams, and if you draft him, you're creating a team to dominate in the playoffs. Now, I do have a brain before I start this. He's not going to be a top 25 wide receiver around guys like Jerry Jeudy and Terry McLaurin the second he comes back, but if he's being drafted as the wide receiver 60, he can easily outperform Brandon Cooks, Juju, Elijah Moore level fantasy production, and that would put him as the wide receiver 40. If you think he's better than those receivers, he's the wide receiver 30. His 6-game suspension and lack of game experience is really keeping him low in these drafts, and that's honestly a good thing for us. We can get him at massive value. And the other half of the reason why I really like him at this ADP is because the second he comes back into this Lions offense, he's going to be the clear wide receiver 2. Because again, there is nobody outside of Amon-Ra getting targets here. He's going to add another element to this offense that they wouldn't rather have, and this offense is just going to be more well-rounded and electric when he comes back. And that might sound like a stretch to some people, but it's really not. There's already been so much hype around him in training camp, and he seems to be doing very, very good, and I think he can come right back into ranking 13th in yards per route run and efficiency. So as long as he stays healthy and doesn't get suspended longer, he's going to absolutely smash this round 10 ADP. But moving down to round 11, probably my favorite sleeper of the entire draft to take is Greg Dulcich, and he's easily going to outperform all of these other players at this ADP. Looking at his rookie season, he was one of the few outliers in production. And if you watch any of my videos, you know I don't like drafting rookie tight ends because historically, they just don't produce very well. They have to learn how to be a receiver and an offensive line, which is a challenge in itself. so they usually just don't get very many targets and offensive opportunities, so I stay away from them. But Dulcich was one of the small group of tight ends ever to have over 55 targets on the year, and he missed 5 games last season. He finished the season averaging almost 6 targets a game, but it really doesn't feel like that because Russell Wilson was so bad. Out of those 55 targets, Dulcich only caught 30 of them, which sounds bad, but wait a second. If we look at last year's data, 1/3 of Dulcich's targets were not catchable. And you guys need to understand what this means. 1 out of every 3 balls thrown his way were not even in his vicinity to make an effort to catch it. And with that being said, this offense can only improve. They ranked pretty much last in every single offensive metric in efficiency, and now Russell Wilson gets a full offseason to work with the team, and his supporting cast of a roster is actually a lot better than most people expect, and is better than most other teams. Sean Payton has said so many times that he wants to get Greg Dulcich more involved in this offense, and he has pretty much every single green light you could ask for. The only red flag with Greg Dulcich is if this offense does not improve at all this year, which is pretty unlikely, and that's out of his control. He's being drafted as the tight end 14 behind guys like Chig Okonkwo, Dalton Kincaid, and Cole Kmet. I really do think it's going to be easy to outperform all of those guys. So his ADP in the 11th round is absolutely amazing, and he had such a good rookie year. He's gonna improve again. But in round 12, my favorite late round sleeper and a guy that I target every single time in the 12th round is Tank Bigsby. He's been moving up in drafts a lot recently. Tank is such an interesting case at running back because he's being drafted so low as the backup to Travis Etienne, which is a lot more of a valuable place than most people think it is. And the reason I believe in him so much to smash his ADP completely is because Travis Etienne is just not efficient whatsoever, and let me explain why he's not efficient. Yes, Travis Etienne was the RB1 last year, a complete workhorse if you could say that, but his role is changing. He was really the only running back on this offense. It really wasn't by choice. The only competition he ever had last year in the entirety of the season was James Robinson, Snoop Connor, and JaMycal Hasty. They're all clearly below Tank Bigsby's level, but they still gave all of these running backs a chance for volume in this backfield when they had the chance. The reason for all of this is because Travis Etienne is not efficient. He ranks 6th in red zone usage at the running back position, but 32nd in red zone touchdown rate. And that's actually insane, but that's not even it. He ranked 15th in routes run out of the backfield, but 33rd in targets on those route runs. So despite running all these routes out of the backfield, he could not get open, did not get targeted, and just was not efficient. Despite being one of the most targeted running backs in the entire NFL. Like, that's crazy. If we put all of this together, Travis Etienne was not good in the receiving game. He wasn't good at the goal line, and they just drafted Tank Bigsby in the 3rd round, and those are the 2 things he is especially good at. Not to mention the countless times Doug Peterson has said he wants to build out and deepen this running back room, and that's exactly why the very first thing he did on this team was draft Tank Bigsby. So Tank is going to be locked into a couple carries a game and a majority of the receiving work, and if Travis Etienne were to go down, he is going to be a true workhorse running back because there's quite literally no other running backs behind those 2 in this offense. He would be a 3-down back, a red zone guy, and a receiving guy, so I love this value in the 12th round because at this point we are shooting for straight upside, and he's the definition of that. But when we go down to round 13, we're kind of getting thin on value, so my favorite player here is probably just going to be Romeo Doubs pretty easily here. So many people are high on Christian Watson this year, and if you really do believe in this Packers offense to take Christian Watson as a 5th round pick, why not just grab Romeo Doubs 8 rounds later? Because then you just get a piece of this offense and there's way less risk attached to it. Because if the Packers just so happen to be bad, Christian Watson's going to burn you in the 5th round, but Romeo Doubs won't. If the offense just so happens to be good to support Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs is going to outperform his ADP too. He has a pretty easy path to fantasy football relevancy. He's a wide receiver too, and all the other players at this ADP are just not even startable. Wide receiver 2 in the 14th round is pretty good value to me, so I would take a chance on him. But that is going to finish off this video of my favorite picks in every single one of your fantasy football rounds. I do appreciate you guys hanging out and watching this video. If you did make it this far, go ahead and drop a like and let me know in the comments what you think of this list and who your favorite players are to draft in each round. And I will see you guys in the next video.